Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Sandy.
And this is the Italian American Stories podcast. Well, before we dive into today's story, we actually have a Paisani tale to share.
Yeah.
I know. I'm pretty excited about that. So this story, it comes from Italian Farmer USA, but he put his family's story in the form of a song. So in the song, it talks about how his family came from Italy to Rhode Island and then Boston and kind of how they got settled in America. So we're going to share that song now.
Yeah, that's a different way to tell your story.
I know, it's kind of
interesting.
It is. It's creative. And so the song is called Roots Across the Ocean. So we're going to play that for you right now.
From the hills of Atri, the grapevines touch the sky. Nana's garden bloomed with love and time just floated by. Tomatoes like rubies, olives on twisted trees. In the shadow of the mountains where life moved with ease. Packed our dreams and seeds, crossed the ocean wide. Landed in Rhode Island with hope as our guide. The soil felt strange at first, but we knew what to do. With hands in the earth, the old world felt anew. Roots across the ocean, from Italy to this land. Digging deep in red clay, with every calloused hand. Gardens tell our story, in rows of green and gold. From Atri to Rhode Island, new tales of old. Summer smells basil, winters taste like wine. Heritage and harvest in every winding vine. Neighbors come for wisdom, share a pie and laugh. In life's simple pleasures, we find our better half. Children grow like seedlings under wide open skies. Learning all our secrets with wonder in their eyes. Their hands get dirty like ours did long ago. Mapping out tomorrow in the gardens we sow. Roots across the ocean, from Italy to this land. Digging deep in red clay with every calloused hand. Gardens tell our story in rows of green and gold. From Atri to Rhode Island, new tales of old. Roots across the ocean, from Italy to this land. Digging deep in red clay with every calloused hand. Gardens tell our story in rows of green and gold. From Atri to Rhode Island, new tales of old. Oh, new tales of old.
That was really cool. It
was very unique.
Yeah, it was neat to hear his family story through a song.
Right.
So that was great. And when we introduced the song, I didn't add his name in there because when he shared his song with me, he didn't provide his name. But while the song was played, I jumped on Instagram and saw that he was online. And so I sent him a message and asked to share his name, if I could share his name. And he said yes. So his first name is Alexander, and he has a farm in Rhode Island. So, and you can find him on Instagram. So his Instagram handle is Italian Farm USA RI, and check it out. Yeah, give him a follow. He has some awesome pictures of some cool, but like amazing vegetables that he's grown.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So, and we'll also put his information in the show notes. But Alexander, thank you for sharing your family story with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, let's dive into a new story. We haven't done a story in a while.
Yeah, so here we go.
Here we go. I've had a few interviews that we've done, but we're going to kind of trickle those in between the stories that Mom and I do. So today's story, it's a little spicy, I guess you could say. So we're telling the story about Anna Coiro, and she was a burlesque dancer during the early 1900s and then became an actress. I had never heard of her, and I was kind of just doing some research and ran across her and thought, well, it'd be kind of interesting. We haven't done a story like this one. So if you search her up, her last name is normally spelt Corio, Corio, and that's because she had to change it when she became a burlesque dancer because some of her family didn't approve of what she was doing as a profession. So her last name is actually spelt Coiro, but like I said, she just basically changed the R and the I around to Corio.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so it's kind of cool.
They disowned her.
Some of them did, yeah. But I think most of her family, though, eventually comes around to it. All right, so let's dive in. So Anne was born on November 29th, 1909 in Hartford, Connecticut. And her full name was actually Anna Maria Coiro, like we talked about earlier. But when she changed her name, she even dropped the A from Anna and just went by Anne. And her parents were Ludovico and Olympia. And both her parents were born in Campania in the 1860s. So they came to America in 1888 and settled in Connecticut around 1899. And they had 11 or 12 children, just depends.
Wow.
It was hard to pin that one down. And Anne, she was the third youngest.
That's a lot.
It is. That is a lot. And so her family, they were described as being very religious and traditional Italian family. And so kind of like we've hinted at, keep that in mind as we go through Anne's story. So, and Anne, she actually performed in a church play when she was 8 years old. And it sounds like this is when the acting and dancing bug really bit her because she would reference this moment a lot throughout her whole life. And she said that after the play was over at her church, she was so excited and happy to be in the play that she wouldn't leave the stage. And her parents had to come and carry her off of the stage.
Oh, wow.
That's kind of a funny story.
She was starstruck.
She was like, I like this. I'm not getting off this stage. So in the 1920s, and she was a high school student at Hartford Public High School. And during this time, she started entering different dancing and beauty contests, and she performed really well, and she actually won a few contests. But in 1924, at the age of 15, Anne won a contest. And after that, she thought, you know what? This is what I want to do. And so she left home at the age of 15 to pursue her dancing career.
Wow.
I know.
That's pretty brave.
Really brave.
Especially that time.
Exactly. And she went from Hartford, Connecticut to New York City. So she had quite the change. And so once she got there, she started secretly working as a singer in a burlesque show. And so it said that she was just in the chorus line. So she wasn't dancing at this time. She was just singing. And this was hard on her family because they didn't want her to leave. They weren't really sure what she was doing. Yeah. And
that's a young age.
It's so young. And they knew she went to New York City, but they weren't really sure what she was doing. So her parents were like, oh.
Right. Who's taking advantage of her? Or?
Exactly. Yeah. Who is she staying with? Those kind of things. Yeah. And so in 1925, sadly, Anna's father, he did pass away at the age of 65. And she went home for a little while and during that time to be with her family. But she left again and she went back to New York without really telling her family what she was doing. Well, her mother, Olympia, like a true Italian mother, figured out what she was doing. She finally, I think, just asking around the neighborhood, asking other friends and family, and finally somebody spilled the beans. So Olympia, she headed down to New York City to attend Anne's show. Uh-oh. And Anne later told a reporter, quote, "You can imagine my surprise to see her sitting right there in the front row." How funny is that?
Is funny.
And so she goes down there and she sat in the front row and watched her performance. And, like we talked about earlier, her mother's strict Catholic, very traditional, was not happy. But after watching her performance, she kind of changed her mind, or I guess at least came around to the idea of, well, this is what it is. It's not, I can't change this sort of thing. And I guess after the performance, she told Anne, as long as they look and not touch. And like we talked about earlier, I think Anne, she was just singing at this point, not dancing. So that probably didn't feel so bad for,
right.
what her mom saw. But shortly after this, her boss told her that if she did want to start dancing, they would pay her more. And this was when Anne's career really kicked off.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how old she was at that time, but that's kind of when she started. So she started really gaining fame when she was a featured performer on the Mutual Burlesque circuit in 1925. And so this circuit, they were around from 1922 to 1931. And the show included singing, dancing, and comedians like Abbott and Costello. They were there. But they actually, it's interesting because they weren't a comedy duo at this time, but they were just performing in the burlesque act as comedians, separate comedians.
Oh, so that's how they met and got started.
Exactly,
probably.
Yeah. And Anne talks a lot about it in interviews and stuff when she's asked about the burlesque shows, how they were meant to be funny in a way. And so she's like, while you have the dancing and that can be really beautiful, there was comedians and there was meant to have this comedy aspect to it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the circuit would travel to various states around the country. And it sounds like her mother truly came around to accepting Anne's profession at this time, because in 1930, her mother held a huge party in Anne's honor. So Anne was coming back to her hometown of Hartford, Connecticut to perform in a burlesque production of Girls in the Blue. So for this homecoming, her mother threw a huge party, and I guess it had numerous guests that included her friends and family, and a lot of Anne's burlesque team came to the house, and there were musicians at the party, and of course there was a huge dinner.
That's nice, though.
Yeah, because it's, you might not agree with it, but you can't change it.
That's her life, and she sounds safe, and that's what she enjoys.
Exactly. So you might as well,
if you want to be a part of her.
Yep. Support it in the ways that you can, that you feel comfortable with. And honestly, it sounds like the whole town was pretty excited to have Anne come back home to perform the play. It was like, the hometown girl.
Right.
Made
it big time in New York.
Exactly. Now she's coming back to our town because on the opening night of the play, a lot of city officials attended. And after the play, they had a large buffet dinner at the theater with Anne and the other performers. So this was a
nice
big performance.
Yeah.
And so, but a year later in 1931, the burlesque circuit, the Mutual Burlesque circuit, it closed down. So Anne started working with Minsky's Burlesque in New York. And this burlesque show, it would go from New York to Boston. And she would perform a lot at the old Howard Theater in Boston. And this is kind of one of the things that Anne is known for, is performing at the old Howard Theater. And because she was truly beloved, she was known as the Queen of Burlesque there, and she also loved performing there. So she would perform for the mayor, businessmen, and the big thing was the students who went to Harvard would go to the theater to watch her. And so the Harvard students, they loved going and watching Anne's show. And in fact, legend has it that there was a saying around Harvard that you couldn't graduate until you saw Anne perform at the old Howard Theater. And in fact, there were rumors that John F. Kennedy attended the show from time to time too. So,
yeah, that
sounds about right.
Right.
Yeah. But while working for Minsky's, Anne met Edward Callahan, who was the general manager of the Empire Burlesque Association. Burlesque, I think, was so big at this time. There was just all these small companies that held their own burlesque shows. And so I'm sure they all kind of knew each other around this time. And the two, they dated for a while and then were married in December of 1933. And the couple, they were married in Ohio at his parents' house because I think Anne was performing there at that time. And Edward, he was actually from Ohio and had worked in the theater burlesque world for many years in Ohio. So their wedding day, it was an interesting one. So like I said, Anne was in Ohio doing some performances, but Edward was in Hartford, Connecticut on business. So it's kind of funny.
Flip-flop.
They flip-flopped. He's in her hometown and she's in his home state. And so Edward, needing to get back to Ohio so that he can attend his wedding, he borrowed his brother's car. But unfortunately, he was in a car accident and rolled the car in Pennsylvania. So that's not good. He wasn't hurt though. He was okay. So he boarded a train and headed back to Ohio so he could get married.
Wow.
And so the paper, it made it sound like he made it back to Ohio that same day and the couple were married. And maybe they were, but I can't help but wonder if maybe it was the next day they got married.
Yeah,
that's a lot in one day. They made it sound like it was this crazy day, and who knows, it could have been. But in 1937, Anne, she received an anonymous letter from someone demanding $2,000 or they would hurt her or a family member. So, Anne, she's starting to get big and popular and known across the country. So unfortunately, you have those people out there who take advantage of it. Yeah. So obviously this terrified Anne and she was wanting to get in contact with the police. But before she even had a chance to go to the police, a man showed up at her door, offering to protect her. Weird.
Well, that's something that's strange.
Yeah.
Is he the same person that sent the letter?
Exactly. And so it's like, how do you know that I received this letter? And so this man, he was Paul Reno, and he actually used to work as a doorman for one of the theaters that Anne performed at. And so obviously, like, it raised a red flag for you and I, and was like, what is happening? And so she went and told the police. And the police, they questioned Reno, but he denied mailing the letter and said that he had just heard about the threats through the rumor mill.
Huh.
So I don't know. Apparently the letter was mailed from New York to her home in Pennsylvania. They were living in Pennsylvania at that time. And Reno lived in Pennsylvania as well. So, but that doesn't mean he couldn't drive up to New York and mail a letter.
Yeah.
So, but nothing ever came of this, and luckily no one was hurt. So,
oh, thank goodness.
Just a strange story, right?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
And if it was Reno, allegedly, which I kind of think it was, why would you go tell? You're not a very smart criminal.
No.
Hey, I heard you got this letter.
Like he wanted to get a little involved with her somehow.
Yes, exactly. Knocks on her door. You should have received a letter by now. Did you get that letter? Nope. Okay, I'll come back tomorrow. It's like you're just telling on yourself, basically.
Right.
But in 1937 or 1938, I couldn't really pin the year down, and she took her mother back to Italy to visit her hometown in Naples.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so the town, the people who lived in the town, they knew that they were coming. And when Anne and her mom started entering the town in the car, the children would scream, "The Americans are here! The Americans are here!" And they would run down the street and throw flowers at the car. They were, because I think they knew that Anne was famous as well. So I'm sure her mom probably wrote letters back to her cousins and stuff. And so they were like, we have a famous American coming. And so it was cool because, her mother was able to visit her relatives that she hadn't seen in years. And it's pretty neat, huh? Uh-huh. And so, her mom was able to see her child at home, but her mom really wanted to go and see the church that she was married in. And her parents were buried there. But sadly, when they got there, they were pretty disappointed because the church, it was in such bad condition that it was closed up. And so this village didn't really have a church anymore. And it meant so much to Anne and her family. They had so much history there.
That's actually surprising.
Yeah.
You would think that the town people would have kept the church.
Exactly. Unless it was just so expensive they couldn't, afford it. And so Anne, she went to the town officials and said, fix the church up I don't care how much it costs. Just fix it up and I'll pay for all of it.
Oh, wow.
I know. And so after that was done, they put a plaque on the church honoring her father and mother, as like just honoring her father and mother. So
yeah, for thanking them.
Yes. Exactly. Thanking them for doing that. So
hopefully they kept it up.
I hope so too. I know, especially after the war hit and stuff. So,
right.
So in 1939, a lot of burlesque shows and theaters, they were shut down. So Anne decided that she would turn to acting. And because the burlesque, I think it was just people were not happy with the shows. I think that they were changing. And in fact, New York put a complete ban on burlesque shows. And that ban wasn't lifted until 1955. So,
wow.
Yeah, they were done with them, I guess. And so Anne, she moved from the East Coast to Los Angeles, California. And that's where she kind of started her acting career. She acted in most of her movies were between 1941 and 1944. And they were movies like Jungle Siren, Swamp Woman, and Call of the Jungle. And I saw at one point, like, even she said, yeah, they were kind of B-rated movies, but it's just.
I wonder if her husband went with her to California.
Well, it's funny that you say that because at this time there's a ton of rumors, and I saw it in the papers that they were talking about divorcing and stuff like that.
That's a major trip.
That's a huge move.
And
I didn't see anything about him going with her, so it's hard to say. But going back to 1939, sadly, Anne's mother, Olympia, she passed away that year. She'd been suffering from some type of an illness and even had a couple of operations in the months before her death. So that was really hard on Anne. Her and her mother were really close, but at least they got to take that trip to Italy together. So that's pretty cool. But unfortunately, after Olympia passed away, Anne and her siblings, they started fighting in court over the will and estate of Olympia.
Here we go.
I know, it happens. And so the will apparently stated that Anna was the executor of the estate and was to get $30,000. And the will said that her siblings were all to just get $1, and apparently one brother was completely cut out of the will. So her siblings, they contested the will, saying that it was not valid, that the will was created when Olympia was really sick and she didn't really understand what was going on. And so this court battle, it went on for over a year. And from what I could find, I think Anne won the court battles. Not 100% sure on that. And I'm not sure exactly, what happened. I saw one thing where they talked about splitting the $30,000 up. But regardless, I'm sure it was just hard on everybody to have to deal with. And it sounds like Anne made I'll go into it in a little bit, a ton of money at her burlesque shows. At one point she was making $2,000 a month, $2,000 a week. And at the time it was $20,000. And so she would save her money, and she would send a ton of money to her mom.
I was wondering where that money came from back then.
Exactly.
Even selling a house wouldn't be
that much. And she bought another house for her mom. I think she had her mom kind of hold a lot of her money, and she gave her mom a lot of her money. And I think that's where that $30,000 came from, like you said.
That makes sense.
It does, yeah. After this, World War II was on the brink. And when that started, Anne was a pinup girl for the weekly U.S. Army publication. And she visited the USS Yorktown. And a lot of the men that were on that ship said that Anne coming to their ship to perform was their favorite memory.
I'm sure.
I'm sure it was. And so after the 1940s, Anne, she never went back to, well, I don't want to say she never went back, but she took a break, I guess you could say, from performing in the burlesque shows. And she said it was because they were getting too lewd and less professional. So they were turning, because like we talked about earlier, there was the comedy act and all of that kind of stuff, where I think it was just kind of more becoming about the dancing, if you catch my drift. Right. And so, for example, okay, here's where I was talking about the money. So in 1941, Anne was offered $1,000 a week to perform as a dancer, but she would have to take her clothes off, and she wasn't comfortable with that. So she turned that down. but that was $20,000 at that time in 1941. And I saw some articles where she was making, at some point, she was making a couple thousand, 3,000 a week. I mean,
right. That's what you were saying.
A lot of money. So, and like I said, she turned
a lot of money now.
Oh my God. Yeah. $1,000 a week is a lot. But like I said, and she did turn it down, and she said she was just tired of these types of roles, and she just really wanted something different, but it was just hard for her to kind of get away from that role that everybody saw her in as the dancer and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So in 1943, Anne and Emmett's marriage officially fell apart and they divorced. But Anne, she remarried in 1944. She married a vaudeville actor, Bob Williams. I guess they had known each other for years, just in the burlesque and vaudeville circuit. So, but that marriage, it did not last, and they divorced. I believe it was 1953 when they divorced. But Anne, she would go on to marry her third and final husband, Michael Iannucci, and I couldn't find the marriage date, and I searched and could not figure out when they got married. And I thought, well, maybe they went to Italy to get married or Mexico, and I'm just not finding this marriage certificate. But later on, I was reading an interview, and they actually kept their marriage secret for 8 years. They didn't tell anybody because they thought that it would kind of make Anne's career, it wouldn't look good for her career. So, but eventually the secret got out and everybody knew that they were married. I mean, they were living together. They were always with each other. So,
right.
But he was 21 years her junior.
Oh, so that's why they were being secret.
That's what I'm wondering too, if that was it. And he used to be a linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But Anne, she would continue to act and perform on radio shows throughout the 1950s. But in 1962, she decided that she would try out her hand in screenwriting. And she actually developed a play called This Was Burlesque, and it would debut on Broadway for a few years. And so the play, it was based off of her memories of her burlesque days, because, like we talked about.
Before it got so.
Exactly, where, the way that she remembered it and not.
Right.
And so she kind of wanted to honor that. And so she would actually even perform in the play a few times.
Oh, that's not, because she's getting older now.
Yeah, because she was born in 1909, and this is the 60s. So, and then in 1968, she actually turned the play into a book, and eventually it was also turned into an HBO special.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, she did quite a bit.
She did. She did a lot. In fact,
starting out at 15 on her own.
On her own, leaving Hartford, Connecticut for New York City. Yeah. And in fact, the next thing that we're going to talk about is something else she did. She actually spent a lot of time teaching as well. So she loved dance, and she wanted to continue that. And one way she could do that was teaching people how to burlesque dance.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And so she did that during the 1960s. And she just said that she always felt like she was a teacher at heart and just enjoyed teaching that dance. So her and Michael, they actually opened up a theater in Springfield, Massachusetts, where they would have shows come in, but that's also where she taught dance. So
they went back. She left California.
Yeah, so she did after those few years, the divorce, and then her few years of acting, she went back to the East Coast. And so in the 1970s, her and Michael, they actually revived the play, This Was Burlesque, and they went on a tour across the states. And in an interview in 1971, Anne was asked how she stays in such good shape for the shows. And she told the reporter that she doesn't diet, but tries to avoid desserts and starches as much as she can. But then she said, but I'm Italian and I like my pasta, and I'll still cook that from time to time.
Yeah.
So, and the reporter also asked her if they would perform on Christmas. And she said, no, I'm Roman Catholic. We won't be performing on Christmas.
Well, she exercised all the time too, with all the dancing.
Exactly. I mean, teaching dancing and everything kept her in shape. And so she also started 2 clothing lines. I know she was an entrepreneur.
Wow.
And they had shops for her clothes in the US and in Italy. So She was
Wow.
doing all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. But unfortunately, they did have to close their theater in Springfield due to the overhead costs getting too high and just declining attendees to the theater. But during this time, they had actually opened theaters around the country. And so for example, they had a theater in Florida that they operated for many years. So, and she had bought numerous homes around the country. Like she had homes in California, Ohio, Florida. But sometime in the 1990s, the couple, they were definitely getting older. They settled down in New Jersey. And on March 1st, 1999, at the age of 89, she passed away after contracting pneumonia. And so she was 89. I mean, she lived
that's
a really full
right.
life. And it was neat. She had one of her obituaries. It talked about how, she never had any children throughout her life, but she always took really good care of her nieces and nephews. And she wanted to ensure that they could go to college or be housewives, whatever they wanted.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. So, and her obituary also mentioned how she loved to host her family and cook large Italian dinners. And even one of her nephews talked about how she would always sponsor his baseball teams and buy all of their uniforms and stuff. So,
Oh, that's good.
yeah, that is the story of Anna Maria Coiro.
That was very interesting.
It was.
It was different.
It was. We haven't done anything like that. And I thought, that's kind of cool. We'll do something a little different. So if you want to send in a Paisani tell, you could send that to our email address. It's itamstories@gmail.com, or message us on Instagram. Same handle, basically. I think it's, if you just search an Italian American Stories podcast. And don't forget to follow our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Well, we hope you enjoyed listening to the story of Anna Coiro, and we hope you come back to listen to more stories about Italian Americans. See you next time.
See you next time.